Citizens R is evolving as the WADR's partnership with NET continues. This April, your NET Democracy and Governance program is going to the Sahel. We will focus on Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and other West African countries, including Benin, Togo, Nigeria, and the Gambia. Bolder conversations, real voices, inclusive discussions. Let's talk democracy. Let's talk governance. Let's talk your truth. Citizens R Season 2 in partnership with the National Endowment for Democracy, NET, on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM, Dakar. Good morning and welcome to Citizens Hour on West Africa Democracy Radio. I am Atia Winimbila.
And I am Veronique Njai. This is another edition supported by the National Endowment for Democracy, NED.
Now, on our last episode, it was the eve of Benin's presidential election. We examined the preparedness of the election management body's expectations and possible outcomes.
As you know, the polls were relatively peaceful and turnout at approximately 59%. Finance Minister Bromold Wadani, backed by the ruling coalition, and running mate Mariam Chibi Talata secured a landslide victory, with around 94% of the vote against the sole candidate accredited opposition, Paul Humpe of the Kauri Forces for an Emerging Benin.
Today, 2 weeks after the April 12 polls, we examined the role of election observers, lessons learned from the polls, and what all of this means for Benin and West Africa as a whole.
We ask, what impact, if any, did election observers make in the contest, and what lessons apply across West Africa amid growing questions and political pluralism, voter apathy in urban areas, and public trust?
Remember that we're live on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM in Dakar, Senegal. We're also streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube. You can also join us on the WADR app.
To begin the conversation, in Porto Novo, the capital of Benin, the presidential election reportedly took place peacefully on April 12th. Local observers were present throughout the day to ensure the transparency of the process. Many believe they played a crucial role in the smooth conduct of the vote. To assess this situation, here's a report by Pulsheri Gemino from Radio Weke, one of our partner radio stations in Benin. And this report focuses on domestic observers on the ground. This report is voiced by Imo Edit.
Local observers were deployed at virtually all polling stations across the country. Beninese civil society established an electoral platform to monitor the April 12 presidential election. It brought together more than 200 civic organizations. A total of 1,700 local observers covered thousands of polling stations across 17,000 locations. Joel Atai Gudegbe is one of the leaders of the electoral platform.
We can
say that our observers have monitored at least 4,000 to 5,000 of the 17,000 plus polling stations set up. The goal is to collect data based on specific criteria. These criteria cover a number of factors related to transparency, the quality of organization, and voter confidence.
To ensure the transparency of the presidential election, the electoral platform set up an election situation room. This allowed it to analyze the extensive data from the field, which was reported to it by these observers. Again, here is Joel Atai.
This concept connects field observers to the platform's central office or headquarters via text messages sent according to specific codes. At set intervals and based on predefined criteria, these messages are then collected by IT platforms at what is known as the election situation room. So IT platforms collect the messages and project them onto a map to provide snapshots of the overall situation in the country at a given moment. This then allows, beyond the technical room, another room known as the specialist room, comprising experts with diverse backgrounds such as those in elections, security, sociology, statistics, demography, and law. There are a number of specialists who collect and analyze the data, can direct it, or have the facts verified by a room we call the verification room. This is to address fake news.
Celle de vérification s'agissant des fake news.
Despite a few irregularities noted during the presidential election, observers describe the vote as generally transparent.
We did not fail to ask the Constitutional Court to use every means at its disposal to distinguish cases where water jamming may have occurred, which undermines the voting rights of certain voters.
The mobilization and role of local observers in ensuring the transparency of the election was praised by political actors. Paul Hungbe, Dakar Forces for an Emergent Benin candidate in the April 12 presidential election, has acknowledged defeat as indicated by the results, a fact confirmed by observers. Joel Hayusunu is one of the leaders of the FCBE party.
After the selection process, numerous irregularities were identified. We received many reports. The feedback was not very positive. Our candidate has already congratulated candidate Wadani.
To ensure the transparency of elections in Benin, local election observers are becoming increasingly active with each election. They play an important role in monitoring the voting process.
Well, clearly from that report, there was some form of collaboration between the local observers working side by side with polling officials and party agents, but there were also questions about irregularities and what possibly could have been, could have happened during this entire process, Vero.
Yes, I mean, when it comes to elections, it's always difficult to rule irregularities out. But yes, the conversation is still on. We are still looking at the impact of observers when it comes to free and fair elections. To get into the conversation proper, let's bring in our panel for today's conversation or today's discussion. We have Professor Stefania Paradisi, a former EU international observer and head of the Italian Institute for International Political Studies. Good afternoon. I know it's already afternoon in Italy.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a true honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have Gafudu Sakpoho, who is a political analyst and a journalist who has extensively covered the April 12 presidential elections in Benin. Gafudu, good morning. Yes, because it's still morning in Benin. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very good. I hope we are doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we are very glad that you're able to join us today. We welcome both of you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll definitely start the conversation with you, Gafudu. While covering the Benin election, would you say that national and international observers contributed to the general conduct and transparency of the poll? What was your general observation?
Yeah, my general observation is that all the observers, international observers, were all really happy because I came across all of them on most of our voting polls. We met, we discussed, we chatted, and they were all excited. They were happy, and most importantly, they were accessible. Contrary to what used to happen. They were open and always ready to share their views and what they think about what's going on. So I would say that it was an environment of trust, confidence, and this really helped to improve the situation on the ground. And I believe that that also played a great role in everything what happened on election day.
You mentioned that contrary to what used to happen, what used to happen in the past, and what do you think has accounted for this building of trust and collaboration?
Yeah, what used to happen is that in the past, most observers would be very skeptical, not always willing to share their views on the ground. They will always want to wait until the end before. For example, I'll just give a simple example of the African Union observers,
Okay.
they came and said, okay, don't you have questions for us? But
I
usually they'll
see.
say, okay, wait until the day at the end, and then we tell you what we think. But they came and said, okay, don't you have questions for us? And we were like all surprised, my colleagues and I said, well, this is not what we used to do. And then we had this opportunity, this interview early in the morning on election day with the head of African Union observers.
And when you had that interview, what were the key points of what he said?
Well, of course, they were stuck to the idea of having not only a peaceful election, but also they were expecting that all the electoral rules and regulation are respected, all the democratic rules are respected, because that they are an institution. Democratic rules are very, very important to them. So they were looking forward to everything to happen according to the democratic rules.
I see.
We turn to you, Professor Stefania. Obviously, you have been an election observer yourself, an international election observer, to say. Do you believe that observers make real, measurable difference in elections generally?
Yes. First of all, so really great to see you, Veronique.
Great to see you too.
Yes, I do believe that international observers, as much as local observers, of course, they can make a difference with regards to, first of all, being a presence that can be approached by the citizens, that can be approached by political party representatives, journalists, media, civil society. In terms of sharing, of course, worries and identify things that are not 100% transparent. But the other thing is that they're just, with them present in the polling station should enhance trust in the entire process. It's a sort of, I wouldn't say a guarantee that everything goes smoothly, but to provide a sense of general trust. And in addition to this, usually the presence of observers, be it international or local, has a positive effect on the work of the polling station staff. It is something that has been proven. When you are observed, then you tend to be even more respectful of all the procedures and work better according to the rules. So I certainly believe that the presence of the observers is absolutely important, starting from the atmosphere of trust that it may generate.
Speaking about being respectful, like you mentioned, let's translate that to diplomacy. To what extent do you feel or do you think diplomatic considerations can limit the frankness of international observers?
This is a very good question. And of course, how can I put it? It's something that should not happen. If you want to observe and perform as an international observation mission, you have to rely on the judgment in terms of being professional, being neutral, being impartial, independent. There might be cases, though, I don't have examples for this, but it's reasonable to believe that on some occasions there might be, diplomatic relations or a special attention on behalf of the international mission towards one country, one government. But I would also say that if these things happen, they are not certainly the rule. I would consider them an exception. There are cases, though, but this is something very different from what we are talking about, and I'm referring to post-war situation whereby the international community is willing to support the first step in transitioning to democracy, first of all, elections, and might be interested in supporting and say, okay, these are not really perfect elections, but you are on a good path.
Okay.
So I would answer to your question this way.
All right. Thank you. And just another question on the building of trust and what the election observers really do? When it comes to building trust, we have various stakeholders in an election. We have the electorate, we have the political parties, and then we have the electoral management bodies, the electoral commission, etc. In terms of building trust, who are the election observers building trust among, or is it across these stakeholders?
Across all the stakeholders, because it's obvious that citizens do see observers in the polling station the day where the elections take place. But this is just a tip of the iceberg of the activities of observers. They usually start or may start months before the elections take place. And because they work with media or political parties, work in terms of observing, monitoring, and therefore, they have the duty to get in touch with all the stakeholders and says, like, we're here. Should you have any complaint? Would you wish to raise any concern? Please let us know, because the international organizations, missions, electoral missions might have an impact. So stakeholders, all of them.
Across the board. That's great. Thank you. And we will delve deeper into this, but let's now look at the election that was held on April 12 in Benin. There were, of course, numerous international observer missions, and they were on hand to monitor the vote. They worked alongside local observers to help ensure transparency, as we have discussed, across thousands of polling stations in the country. But what was their actual role in this particular election, and how can the government be encouraged to better incorporate their recommendations? Because after the elections, usually there are some recommendations that these observation missions do present to various government and electoral management bodies. Well, here is a report by Epiphany Keke of Ocean FM in Cotonou, one of our partner radio stations, voiced by Sankule Janko.
Deployed 3 weeks before Election Day, observers from the African Union, ECOWAS, the International Organization of La Francophonie, and many others covered the entire election process, from assessing the legal framework to analyzing electoral disputes and announcing the results. The framework for evaluation was well defined. Almost unanimously, the observation missions delivered their preliminary verdict the day after the vote. Nana Akufo-Addo is the head of the ECOWAS mission.
Dans l'ensemble, le processus d'ouverture s'est déroulé dans le calme et de manière ordonnée.
Overall, the opening process proceeded calmly and in an orderly manner, with a visible but non-intrusive presence of security forces in most localities. However, observers noted isolated cases of certain polling stations opening early outside the start time stipulated by the electoral law, and sometimes, in the absence of political party representatives, the mission observed 1,250 polling stations spread across the country's departments and major municipalities. Our observations noted instances of ballot box stuffing, attempts at vote buying, and interference by election officials at certain polling stations. These are issues that warrant correction in the future. However, these isolated practices were not sufficient to undermine the integrity of the election, which took place in a calm atmosphere and was generally well administered. The vast majority of polling stations visited ensured the secrecy of the vote. In terms of inclusivity, the accessibility of polling stations was deemed generally satisfactory.
L'accessibilité des postes de vote a été jugement globalement satisfaisant.
Observation is not limited to mere observation. Each mission presents a report in which it makes specific recommendations to all stakeholders. Sylvestre Ntibatungaya is head of the African Union Observation Mission.
La mission estime que l'élection présidentielle du 12 avril 2020.
The mission considers that the presidential election of April 12, 2026 took place under satisfactory conditions, with progress made in certain areas, but also challenges that require the attention of the authorities and all stakeholders. The mission makes the following recommendations to the government: strengthen confidence in the electoral process by prioritizing the guarantee of genuine political pluralism based on a representative opposition that is fully capable of exercising its role as a counterweight to the government. Revise the sponsorship system and the provisions regarding the political truce and the right to strike to encourage the political opposition, and strengthen safeguards related to the freedoms of expression, assembly and association.
The work of international observers aims to ensure the transparency of the electoral process. Matthew Ajanu is a political analyst.
Un pays souverain n'a pas à attendre une mission d'observation.
A sovereign country does not need to wait for an observation mission to lend credibility to the process leading to the appointment of its authorities. And a sovereign country, especially one governed by the rule of law and democracy, and acts with conviction because that is what the evidence shows. And so, in my view, they do not have the right to manipulate or influence the transparency of the election.
Observers emphasize the importance of government adopting the recommendations of election observation missions to improve the organization of elections.
Je crois que les missions d'observation deviennent comme des écoles d'apprentissage.
I believe that observer missions serve as learning opportunities to improve and grow together. Benin's experience is something other nations look up to, because whatever people may say, our democratic model continues to inspire other countries. We have held regular elections, and there has been a peaceful transfer of power at the highest level of government. Our country enjoys stability in the sub-region, and we continue to develop a model of democracy, even if we have refined it somewhat. So if we agree on the role of an observer mission, which isn't there to act as a police force, but to see how we operate, our country should welcome it. Regarding the recommendations for improvement, just because we make recommendations doesn't mean everything has to be redone. Just because we identify shortcomings doesn't mean everything is bad. States should draw inspiration from the report this mission leaves behind, and even organize exchange workshops around this report to say, okay, here is what they're telling us, but within our context. It is up to the sovereign state to determine whether its own socio-political and cultural context, whether it wishes to take this or that into account. Because what may constitute a shortcoming on the mission's part is simply a brief stay in the country. Thus, they are sometimes not sufficiently immersed in our socio-cultural realities.
Following the April 12 election, the process of consolidating the organization of a free and transparent election is now underway. It will begin with a thorough review of the observers' final report, which is expected within 6 weeks.
That was a report regarding international observers and their role when it came to the elections in Benin. We heard many perspectives, different perspectives. Yes. I'll bring in what Sylvestre said, and he said that a sovereign nation does not need observation or observers to determine the credibility of the vote. So this brings me to the question, then why observers? Professor Stefania, do you agree to the statement that was made by the political analyst?
Well, there is certainly no obligation for any state to invite an observation mission, obviously. But in terms of credibility in the international arena, it is important, I believe, especially when there are doubts. And this, the international observation missions were fostered in the 90s. And when countries were transitioning to democracy, and Benin was among, the leading countries in terms of democratic development in that term. So a country, where anybody in West Africa could look at. Now, the thing is that it is important anytime when you do have doubts or when you face difficult situation at internal level or in the outside with other international partners, why not having international observers? Actually, international missions reinforce credibility of the state in the eyes of the international partners. So there's no obligation, of course, but I still believe it is very important, and any state would benefit any state, regardless of where it is and the challenges it faces. So I do agree, and yes and no, I would say.
All right. Thank you. Gafudu, I'll bring you in here. You heard from some of the political analysts in Benin about their views regarding the whole observation mission. But tell me, you are a journalist and you also are a political analyst. You understand the situation in Benin. What is the general perception among the Beninese people, journalists, candidates, agents regarding the usefulness of these observers when it came to or boiled down to the Benin elections 2026?
Well, obviously, things wouldn't have been what they have been if there weren't observers that would come in to check and observe what happened. I believe that part of investments on the election was to make sure that all the rules are respected and the observers would not have much to say. I agree with my colleague, the analyst, that thinks that, okay, we don't need, a sovereign country does not need international observers to organize a credible election. But I think it does help, because we are in a global world, and we are also a leading country in terms of democracy in Africa. And recently, I remember Senegal sent their own electoral organization to Benin just a month before the election to learn from Benin some ways of organizing elections. So I think this is a great point. Senegal is a great democratic country, but still they found things that they can learn from Benin at this moment. So it means that we are making a big progress. Benin is making a big progress, but bringing in international observers is also a way to say, yes, of course, we have improved over the years, but we think, we are humble. We think that there might be areas that we still need to improve. And your presence is very important, not to criticize what we are doing, but also to really point out areas that we need to improve. And that's really the feeling that everyone is having here. And the country is proud of the way things went, the peace, and especially security all over the country. People all over the country were able to vote, even in areas that are facing security challenges. Everything went on peacefully. And most importantly, the material was also available. And all these are very important in the view of international observers. Technical speaking, I think it's very important. Of course, the other aspect, democratic aspect, is very important. Inclusion and also participation of all the political class is very important. But still, there's no perfect election. I think that Benin has shown once more that it is a great democratic country, and I think definitely. Well, many other countries are going to learn from us.
It's interesting, and it's good to note that you talk about not just observers coming in to ensure that it is credible and also lift the profile of that election internationally, but also neighboring countries coming in to observe, to learn lessons where they could also improve their processes in order to ensure that they have as successful elections. So it's not just about credibility, but it's also an opportunity for others to learn the good and the bad and do better for themselves in their home countries. Also looking at the Benin election, Gafardu, and what this meant in terms of before the election. You've spoken about security. We also know that there were concerns about the voter turnout. We also know that there was a landslide victory. The voter turnout, some would describe being higher than what was initially anticipated. And also in the wake of the reforms that were going on in Benin, do you think that put more of a spotlight on this election in 2026 as opposed to other elections, highlighting the importance of having all these observer missions coming in just to ensure that, yes, everything goes right, those who want to observe are able to observe, but also that the result is one that is accepted by all?
Well, I think even before we talk about observers, I think there are measures. We earlier talked about the role that all the stakeholders played in ensuring this wonderful election. But the government played a big role in first anticipating on security issues, but also making sure that we have an orderly election. So by taking some measures, reforms did help.
Gafuru, are you with us? You're listening to Citizens Hour on West Africa Democracy Radio, and unfortunately we have lost Gafudu. We will try to reconnect with him, but it's good that he segued into what the government did and also the security situation, because we do know that the issue of observer protection has remained a key concern during elections in recent years, particularly in the northern part of Benin, and that's where we're going into at this moment, because that part of the country has experienced a serious security crisis, making it increasingly difficult for both local and international observers to work safely in certain communities. Vero?
Yes, for this we check in with Lukman Waruchemu of Sota FM, which is also one of our partner radio stations in Malanville, and this report is voiced by Abdullah Hassan.
I remember during the last municipal legislative elections in Karimama, soldiers went missing. Jihadists killed some people. Others were missing. As of this moment, they have not been found.
This account comes from an election observer who highlights just how difficult it is to monitor elections in northern Benin, a region plagued by insecurity. For the April 12 presidential election, measures were taken to prevent tragedies. Adam Guerra, president of the platform of civil society electoral organizations, notes a marked improvement between the two election periods, particularly the combined municipal and parliamentary elections on January 11 and the presidential election on April 12.
The fact is, we supervisors were well protected. Surrounded by police, we were well protected, fully armed. The police were at our disposal. Now, as a supervisor, I truly had the privilege of being well protected. Wherever I am, security is with me.
Increasingly, the Autonomous National Electoral Commission, or SENA, is taking security measures to protect observers. Buhari Abu Sule Adam is the Director General of Elections at SENA.
We ensure security throughout the entire country. When you arrive, we've done everything we can for you. We've given you your kits. We've given you your badges. You will be able to go anywhere and you won't be attacked anywhere. And if you have been, there will be people to listen to you because the police are everywhere, on the roads, wherever you are. They are paid by taxpayers. So that is what I can tell you. But we do not fund election observation because we don't want to influence the judgment of those who wish to observe us. This may shock you, but bear with us. Let us tell you this.
A synergy of action between electoral institutions, international partners, and CSOs appears to have borne fruit during the April 12 election. However, stakeholders are calling for improvements to the system. Adam Guerra, president of the platform of civil society electoral organizations.
Now, our hope is that next time we will be able to provide adequate security for our agents on the ground. It's true that the SENA deployed military personnel to protect SENA members on the ground. I mean, at the polling stations, which are protected, but it would still be appropriate for civil society agents to be protected as well.
According to various stakeholders, ensuring the safety of election observers has been a largely successful endeavor during this presidential election. However, civil society believes that these gains must be consolidated and strengthened in preparation for future elections in Benin.
A report there on the security of election observers.
I'm aware that Gafudo has joined us. Gafudo, welcome back.
Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry for this technical issue that we had.
No, you don't have to worry. These are things that we don't have control over. But yes, now to Professor Stefania, we are still looking at the security of observers. In high-risk environments, should observers prioritize full national coverage or focus on safer areas? What are the trade-offs? You've been an observer yourself, so I think this is a good question for you.
It is a very good question. I would say, first of all, that security of observers is paramount to any international observation mission. So if there are no minimum standards for security, observers would not be deployed. The issue of security might be tricky. In a case that I know of a few years ago, security was used by a government to guide the observers to the polling stations the government decided they would visit. And the rationale behind this was that those polling stations were safe and we are going to escort you. But in the end, observers had no free choice of moving around and going wherever. So security can be, also a way to limit the right of the observers to go and check whenever they go without being announced earlier. So these two things are very important. Security paramount, and security should not compromise the freedom of observers. Then, of course, there are always risks. This is something that observers do know very well. Things can change very rapidly in the field. If tensions mount, this we know. But still, minimum requirements should be in place.
And I'd like to find out some more with that experience of the government, guiding, basically, it's almost like a PR stunt almost, because you're going to where we want you to go, and that kind of thing. Who is responsible for ensuring the security of election observers, both local and international? Whose job is it?
It's the first of all, the country that hosts the mission that should provide security. And of course, usually each mission has its own security experts, and this is part of the core team that is deployed in the country, generally speaking, even months before the elections take place, to make an assessment before the short terms and the long term observers are deployed in the country, the core team. But the first responsibility is in the hands of the hosting country.
Okay. And now this brings the question of credibility, because of the example that you cited. If it is the responsibility of the host nation, doesn't that leave a lot of questions when it comes to credibility and influence for what or how the report of the observers will turn out?
This is, of course, a good question. And of course, and I would like to refer also to what has been said before about, and I've noticed, progresses and challenges. The observation missions, the observers can certainly note that there are progresses. When it comes to security, as you mentioned, there might be progress, and you might appreciate the effort of a government to do its utmost and protect or escort observers. But on the other hand, it's responsibility of the observers to underline when this protection, when these security measures taken are in the end do represent a critical aspect of the overall process. And it's, of course, up to the experience of the observers, it's to the chief of the observing mission to analyze in depth and to understand where is the boundary, where's the limit here.
And that just brings us to now the Benin election. Gafudu, how were election observers able to access difficult to reach areas or areas that are not considered as safe, like Malanville? How did that go generally?
Yeah, generally, observers, not just observers, but I think most of people, like authorities in those areas, were heavily escorted by heavy security escort. they were able to make it safely, but with a very heavy security escort. And in most of the areas like Malanville, Natitengu, Tangita, and even Kandi, Parakou, Karimama, there's a heavy escort. But they could not stay long though, because it's very important. It was just a short observation in a few polling stations. But the most important is that they were able to make it to notice that yes, people came out to vote, and everything went in in a very good atmosphere. So this is of course, it was the government's responsibility to ensure all that, to make sure to choose places to go for security purpose. Stephania, I agree that there could be some kind of control on what the government would like observers to see, but at the same time, it's very important for areas like the up northern region that they're escorted, and also they are shown the way in terms of the stations to visit and the stations not to go to.
Absolutely. It's about an overall evaluation in the end that matters.
Absolutely. I mean, you cannot be everywhere, but it's a general observation of how the process was, how the security situation was. There may be pockets, but in the general scheme of things, everything was relatively cool, calm, and the outcome of the election, the fallouts, have been quite impressive, as noted, internally and internationally as well, definitely.
That's true. And we are still looking at the security of observers. And during the presidential elections in Benin, some observers were attacked by individuals at polling stations in certain areas. They were particularly forced out of the stations where they were supposed to monitor the voting process. Yet these observers remained crucial to ensuring transparency. How can their safety be guaranteed? Part of the answer lies in this report by Peko Alaidea of Radio Alohodo, one of our partner radio stations in Bohikon. The report is voiced by Deborah Amuwo.
At polling stations on election day in Benin, observers were easily recognizable. They wore t-shirts, vests, caps, and badges bearing the logos of the organizations that sent them, whether local civil society platforms or international missions. These observers from national and international organizations patrolled polling stations across the country to help ensure transparency. Generally, observers are exposed to acts of intimidation, threats, and attempts at bribery. Thus, their safety has become a serious issue of concern. According to Benin Civil Society Electoral Platform, which deployed thousands of citizen observers for the April 12th election, some monitors were subjected to physical or verbal violence. As a result, many were forced to exercise extra caution simply to protect themselves while carrying out their duties. Simon Agbeva is an observer. He covered the April 2026 presidential polls for the Constitutional Court.
The observer knows where to go, where to watch, and what position to take. He goes there, watches discreetly, and leaves. Don't be out at night, and you are the one who knows your route. You don't tell anyone. You can even avoid wearing distinctive clothing. You know you are discreet. Your work is discreet.
Despite the legal guarantees obtained by observers from the National Autonomous Electoral Commission (SENA) for domestic observers and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for international observers, their protection remains a challenge. Atayi Gedegbe is an observer that covered the election.
In the field, the observer is on his own. The observer is at the mercy of the situations that threaten his personal safety and, by extension, the integrity of the mission.
Increasingly, the protection of election observers remains a challenge, especially in countries where elections are held amid tense political contexts.
So it definitely cannot be overemphasized how important security is when elections are being observed, especially when the situation is a volatile one. But we didn't have that in Benin, so I guess all good.
Yes, Atiwin. But then I'll bring in Professor Stefania. Obviously, you have said a lot when it comes to ensuring the security of observers. But tell us, you're heading a political school in Italy, one of the best think tanks in Italy when it comes to political affairs. Everybody wants to attend the school, so you would have a lot of knowledge regarding this issue. What are the best or global best practices that have emerged regarding the protection or ensuring the protection of observers while maintaining the independence and credibility of their work?
Well, I must say that learning by doing has been one of the mottos of the international organizations and NGOs throughout the years, starting from the 90s in particular. So there have been shared procedures, assessment on how to deal with security concerns in hosting countries. Of course, usually these procedures, as well as, a code of conducts for observers, they have been internationally shared. And I feel like I'm still part of the world of observers. We keep on looking at the best practices that are shared among international and local stakeholders in order to improve and make it the process safer for the observers. Having said that, there's always a degree of danger, and this is something you accept if you want to participate in those missions. But of course, you have the UNDP, you have the EU, the African unit. You do have all those international organizations that share experience because the benchmarks we are all looking at should be the same for the entire world that invites observers. So I would say that this is the situation at present.
All right, I'll bring in Gafudu now. You are a journalist that covered the elections in Benin. Have you received any reports or incidents of observers being harassed, attacked, or prevented from doing their work?
Like I said earlier, security was one of the key aspect of this election. We haven't in Cotonou and Calavi and part of Porto Novo that I covered. There is no reports of attacks on observers. I think they were highly protected, and there were patrols in the town, not just at the polling stations, but on the streets that we could see the police patrolling. So in the cities like Cotonou, Porto Novo, and Calavi, there's no such incidents, and there's no reports. Everything, and I spotted observers escorted by the police. So they were in their cars, but they were escorted by the police trucks, and I think this played a major role, a big role in the safety of the observers. I mean, both international and local observers.
But you did mention that in some of the locations, because of security, the observers didn't even stay long in these places. So what do you think would have happened? What's the situation?
Well, yeah, it's true. Staying long, not. I was referring to up north parts of the country where we have security challenges, especially with terrorism. Of course, security is there, but anything could happen. This is just anticipatory measures by the government and by the Electoral Commission, just to make sure, just pay attention to much more on the most important aspect of the election. Not trying to stay longer because anything could happen. So not because they suspected anything that was, but anything could happen at any moment in those areas where we are facing terrorist challenges. So I believe this is one of the reasons why they couldn't stay longer. But overall, everything was okay. There's no reports of attacks, like physical attacks, or the vehicles being attacked by citizens or by any bandits or any terrorist groups.
But Gafudu, if the observers cannot do their work freely, doesn't that affect the credibility of their report?
Well, I agreed. I agreed to some extent. First, I think we have to be very happy that at least people were able to vote in those areas. We know there are countries where big parts of country, because of this security issue, people could not even come out to vote. And if we have the opportunity to have people vote and also have the observers visit the stations, even if it's just for a short time. Overall, it depends on what the observers want to assess. The materials are in place. The turnout was okay. And what other aspects? So if at least 50% of what the observers are expecting to observe is actually noted, I think it's the most important thing in highly security challenging areas like Manaville, Karimama, Tangita, and the borders with our neighboring country.
And that then brings me to Professor Stephania. In Benin's election, there was consensus between observers and the electoral management body that the turnout was as it was. The result was, there was a universal agreement that the election was free, fair, and credible. What happens when the election observers' findings contradict that of the electoral management body? It didn't happen in Benin, but I'm sure that in your experience and your observations, it has happened. How does that work?
This is the question. Because we have spoken until now about the election day, and everything was calm, free, and fair. People, I understand, not intimidated, apart from some areas. But again, the observers are not only observing the election day. And it might well be that, the mission says, yes, during the polling day, as a matter of fact, elections were free and fair. But what came first and what followed are not free and fair. If there was no political pluralism, if the opposition was not given the chance to perform full its role, access to media, etc., we have a problem. In this case, of course, with a very diplomatic style and tone, the chief of the mission will write the report, which is what really matters in terms of election observation as an outcome, the expression of what the teams of observers have been observing throughout their stay in the country. And of course, not always, I would say, the governments appreciate what is written in the report. There might be even, there are cases where governments stood up and said, Ambassador, what you've written, it's not correct. But the truth of the matter is that it's the core of everything, having the freedom to express in the final report. That's why we have to wait the final report, because the final report gathers all the impressions, all the work of the observers and elaborate it and analyze it. And if the government is willing to improve this, vis-a-vis the challenges, I think it's a very positive outcome. Whereas if the government wanted to seek a confirmation of how good it was in organizing the elections, in carrying out the elections in a free and fair manner, then Houston, we have a problem, I would say. the government that invite election observation mission know either that there is something not 100% okay, or they want to gain more credibility abroad and within the country. And therefore, I think it's reasonable enough to accept criticism. And by the way, I'm saying criticism, challenges are the right words.
Okay.
So how to address the challenges for the future.
But you know, we've spoken about diplomacy. Vero asked about diplomacy earlier. We've raised it again. Where do you draw the line between diplomacy and absolute transparency? If it's black, it's black. It's white, it's white.
Well, I think you can have black and white in
diplomacy.
Using diplomatic, yes. Okay. The thing is, what has to be, I think, stressed here, there is no election observation missions do not go to a country to criticize or to, show off that they know better than the local staff, government, polling station staff. This is not the point. It should really be appreciated as a hand. And by the way, governments do require the presence of observers. So that's why diplomatic tone is also important, because the truth of the matter is that the mission gives a hand to that country in order to improve the performances and in order to generate trust, to ameliorate the environment, even related to security. So it shouldn't be seen as a sort of exam. I think this would be wrong, but as a way to work together. Very well done here, but maybe the constitutional framework, the legislative framework should be improved, and these are advices. So when it comes to this, I do not see. The other thing different is where the government invited the mission, knowing and that the mission is an obstacle to its plans, and therefore put, in practice obstacles, hurdles. I have stories about this, but it shouldn't be the case.
Yeah. It's good. I from what you've said, what I'm gleaning is that there should be ultimate collaboration for the greater good of the country. It's not a case of what you did was wrong, what you did was right. It was good. Everything can always be improved. And so it's about having an open mind and, working together for the good of the country. And we do know that in the Benin presidential election, it was generally calm. We have discussed the collaboration, the fact that, free, fair, credible, pre-election, post-election, on election day. And one key stakeholder here is the Independent National Electoral Commission, SENA. And they introduced several innovations this year aimed at ensuring the election success. So let's look at the lessons learned and what the overall assessment is for the election. Our correspondent in Cotonou, Aziz Adam Sule, with this report voiced by Augustine Colley.
On the ground, international election observers closely monitored the voting process. Overall, the general consensus is that the election was well organized. Polling stations opened on time in most locations, and voting proceeded calmly, apart from a few minor irregularities, as noted by Roland Kojo, an international observer.
On election day, we also observed the voting process in a number of departments, such as Lokocha in the north, Djougou in the south, Port Novo and Cotonou. We had the opportunity to be at the polling station where the incumbent president cast his vote. We commend Benin's democratic maturity. Benin has served as a model for Africa for a number of years, and as we speak, we have heard of no protest in any city in Benin. For this, we commend all the bodies involved in ensuring the smooth conduct of this election. The point we wish to raise here is to call for enhanced training of electoral officials, because in some polling stations, some were still struggling to find their way around as soon as their polling station opened.
The Autonomous National Electoral Commission, SENA, is satisfied with the results. SENA congratulates the Beninese people for their democratic maturity. All measures were taken to ensure a transparent and credible election. The announced results accurately reflect the voters' choice, says Abdou Soule Adam, Director General of Elections.
The system has room for improvement. We don't claim to be the best in Africa, but we know that, at least since we've been holding elections, we don't end up with people taken to the streets. Because we need a system in place to ensure that everyone's vote counts and to ensure that they can challenge the results if they disagree, using the means provided by law.
The SINA also emphasizes the innovations introduced to enhance the transparency of the electoral process.
The Electoral Commission has staff and managers who are sent to conduct training sessions, but even they are evaluated internally before attending the training to determine whether they are capable of conducting it. So they themselves are required to take tests, even though they work at the Electoral Commission. We don't assume they know everything. We train them on the module and evaluate them on that module to ensure they've mastered it.
But beyond the organization, what political lessons can be drawn from this election? Aristide Kanusu, a political analyst, believes that significant progress has been made regarding elections in Benin.
La présidentielle du 12 avril 2026 a d'abord montré la solidité.
The vote took place peacefully. The Senate released the provisional results with controlled efficiency, and the Constitutional Court reviewed the reliable data provided to it. It cannot be ruled out that there were irregularities, but it is clear that we have made a qualitative leap forward in terms of election organization. The second lesson is the democratic discipline observed from the campaign through the conduct of the election to the announcement of the results. Well, the Wadani Talata ticket was declared the winner in the first round with 94.27% of the vote cast, and the opposition considered defeat even before the official announcement of the results. This shows that in Benin, political competition is increasingly being settled at the ballot box and through the law, rather than through tension.
Par les urnes et par le droit et non par la tension.
Well, you heard it there. Clear successes alongside challenges. Now I'll bring you in, Professor Stefania. Do you feel or do you think short deployment of election observers has any effect on the credibility? Because sometimes observers are only in the country for just maybe a week or 2 or 3 before the elections, and that does not really make them understand the context or what is happening. So what effect do you think short deployment has on the credibility of election observation reports?
And I agree with you, 10 days, 1 week, sometimes 5 days are not enough. But the first immediate positive effect is for the voters to see that international observers are there. And by being there, by their presence, this usually gives a sense of trust. Because they know it's difficult, it's not impossible, but it's difficult to cheat, if you want, so to speak, at the presence of observers, as well as usually the physical presence helps in terms of easing the tension in case of political tension. So this is the first outcome. The other thing is that, of course, the work of these observers, the short-term observers, is, if you will, more technical, like checking what's going on at the opening of the polling station, during the vote, and at the counting, closing of the polling stations and counting. This is their duty, and they are trained. They know how to report. They have to fill in their reports, and this is very important to assess whether the election day, not the elections in general, but the elections day, and the election day was correctly manned. Why am I saying this? Because, again, the election day is only one tiny part of the entire election observation process. But certainly the observers are there with their pens, with their forms, and with their presence to generate trust in the entire process.
Okay, you're mostly focusing on the symbolic aspect of having observers there, but wouldn't we say that that would ignore the main issues that affect the credibility of the elections, which is mostly the context in which the elections are being held?
Yes, that's true. First of all, yes, one symbolic part, it's out of question, of course, but of course, all the information they gather, but they're intertwined blocks. I'm there for a few days with my presence. I take note, and then my analysis of what I see is collected at the headquarters. And this is just one part of the observation mission and the analysis. Like, these international missions are made of experts, and they are experts in legislation, in media, in electoral process, how the electoral process are made to be inclusive, or are just made to support the major party, for instance. It's a sort of engineering, the elections usually. So it is a combination of things, of actions, of analysis, of evaluation, and not just one day. And it's not just a mere presence. This should inspire trust, but it's also what they report. And it counts, it matters. That piece of paper that goes to the HQ per polling station is actually the eyes and the ears of the mission, and the basis on which they evaluate the polling day, not the entire election process.
Thank you, Professor Stefania Gafudu. I'll bring you in now. How did the limited pluralism in this election shape the environment in which the observers had to operate?
Yeah, I know this is a very, very challenging aspect. Observers often they are very skeptical to talk about. Pluralism has been, competition has been seriously affected in these elections before, on election day, and after the election day. I understand the goal is to reshape the environment, is to also improve the way politics is done. So the reforms have been done to really reduce competition, and I think this has contributed to what happened on election day in terms of turnout, in terms of also protests. I mean, in normal conditions, we wouldn't have the opposition come out even before the Electoral Commission announcing the result to concede defeat. Usually we have a little bit of caution from the opposition. We have denouncing, protests from different parts, especially when we have more parties participating in the election. And we also look forward to a second round. So I think one of the victims in these elections is pluralism and competition. But I believe it was done for a good purpose. It's also to ensure that everything goes well. This is what I would say about your question.
Okay, Gafudu, what would you say are the lessons learned for you in this election?
Yeah, the important lesson learned from this election is first to understand that we can actually conduct reforms, and I'll say courageous reforms, without affecting the entire democratic system. Because the goal here is to make sure the reforms serve both for elections, but also for development and stability of the country. And I think this is the most important thing we need to remember and keep here as a lesson to take away from this election, is the reforms help only ensure, reshape the political environment, but also guarantee stability, security, and also development for the country. And Benin has shown the way to many African countries in that sense.
What about lessons learned regarding election observation in Benin?
Come again?
I said, what about lessons learned regarding election observation in Benin?
Yeah, election observation in Benin, I think the lesson learned is we had a civil society that has improved in the way they observe, in the way they report, but also the entire organization and also discipline. I think one important thing we notice in observation is discipline, especially as far as local observers are concerned. We observe a very big discipline, and also they contributed in terms of the quality of their work. And I think it's the most important thing is the improvements in the way they observe, the improvement in the way they contribute constructively, and also the improvement in terms of the way they interact with the society.
And Prof. Stefania, looking at the election observation generally, what for you is the single most important lesson from recent cycles that observer missions and democracies in regions like West Africa should be considering and taking seriously?
Wow, this is the question. This is the question. Lesson learned should always be the fact that democracy and elections do not start and end just during the polling day. This I would like to stress it, because when I hear, that pluralism and competition has suffered in the elections in Benin, this is something important. And so the lesson learned should be, and I understand the aiming at stability, but democracy is participation, democracy is pluralism, democracy is competition. So if I may say that the lesson learned should be always aiming at improving, but consolidating democracy is opening space, is supporting local civil society. It's taking into consideration that elections in a world where democracy is in retreat should, on the contrary, supported and well managed, and taking into consideration all the stakeholders. And I do insist on this, stakeholders, all the bricks in this wall that leads to free and fair elections. So I would think that this is the lesson that in this difficult world we're living in, it seems to me it's getting, I wouldn't say lost, but it's certainly not in good shape.
Professor Stefania, still speaking about lessons learned, what would you say are the biggest myths or misconceptions about the power and the influence of election observers?
Yes, this is also another excellent question. Sometimes, especially foreigners that are coming to a country are either seen as intrusive or might be seen as those who have the magic wand to, change the country. And good that they are coming, good that they are going to make sure that these elections will be free and fair. We do not have this magic wand, of course. And this is a misconception. Certainly, I would, on the contrary, say that the misconception again is the fact that observers are there just for the polling day. The observers, if they are allowed to perform their duties at best, are giving an even more valuable contribution to the elections. They do not have the power to change governments, and God forbid it would happen, right? But certainly with their analysis, their report, their monitoring, their meeting with different stakeholders, including civil society, political parties, opponents, media, journalists, etc., to create an environment conducive to hopefully a good outcome of the election. So the misconception is thinking that election observers are there just, as a presence, as we mentioned before, in the polling station, and that's it. Goodbye. Thank you for coming. No, there is something more, and there is also sharing views and constructive criticism if it's the case, and sharing best practices. It's always a meeting of expertise, and which makes these elections important. And I would really like citizens to see this, and stakeholders to recognize in observers in the international observation mission a counterpart and someone they can collaborate to and rely upon to make the process really free and fair, besides the polling day.
I now want to look at recommendations. In your experience, how often are the recommendations from these election observer missions fully adopted by various governments and electoral management bodies? Very briefly, as you wrap
Yes,
up.
well, once upon a time in the 90s, all the advices were taken immediately. All the countries were willing finally to transition to democracy. The peak of democracy is in the 90s. Now I think that they not usually. There are cases where governments are happy with, yes, the elections have been free and fair that day. And that's it. Okay, we do have our license. We are fine. But dismissing other very important part of the report. So I hope I've answered your question.
Well, diplomatically, yes.
Okay, Professor Stefania, I know you did speak about lessons learned and give quite a few recommendations regarding what should be done. But now let's just look at one proposal. If you had the power to just maybe propose a major reform to improve overall effectiveness and impact of international observers, what would it be? Just one.
Extend the time for the observers to stay in the country.
How long?
Well, the minimum, there shouldn't be missions of, that last 5 days, as it happens, 3 days. It happens. But give the observers the opportunity to understand more and to be more supportive. This is something I would certainly do. And sorry, the last thing, the international community should support strengthening the civil society within countries with training, with awareness of the importance of elections and democracy. Democracy in retreat, as I mentioned before, is not a good thing.
Yeah. And definitely, what we've heard today is clear and nuanced. Observer missions, local and international, remain an important part of the democratic toolkit. They can deter irregularities and offer independent eyes. They can also be an opportunity for countries, neighboring countries, similar countries to learn lessons and best practice. But their effectiveness is undermined when their own safety is threatened and when deeper issues of inclusion come before polling day.
The future of credible elections in Benin and across West Africa lies not just in more observers, but in stronger institutions, genuine inclusion, restored public trust, improved security for monitors, and active citizen participation.
Our sincere thanks to our distinguished guest, Professor Stefania Paradisi, former EU International Observer and head of the ISPI School, and Gafudu Sopoho, a journalist and political analyst who extensively covered the elections in Benin. Thank you so very much for joining us. We also want to say a huge thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, great.
Yes,
and we'll
thank you so
definitely
much.
have you back. We also want to say a huge thank you to our reporters and partner radio stations, Radio Weke, Ocean FM, Sota FM, and Radio Alohado.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Professor Stefania and Gafudu, for joining us on this edition or this net edition of Citizens Hour. It was such a great conversation with the both of you.
But we're not done yet, listeners, so don't go anywhere. To conclude today's edition, we bring you this week's Info Check segment. Election observers are a familiar sight across West Africa, tracking voting processes in various countries.
But how much do they impact the election process? This edition of Info Check explores the role, limits, and real influence of observer missions, from success stories to moments where events on the ground take a different turn.
They are unmissable during elections, with their mostly brown vests, sometimes in other colors, moving between various voting centers, some fixed, others constantly on the move. But beyond the visibility, what is the real impact of election observers in West Africa? Welcome to InfoCheck. I am Francis Boniface, your host. Before we go further, one important clarification. Election observers are often mistaken for monitors, but they are not the same. To break this down, I spoke with Paul Ejime, a global affairs analyst and consultant on strategic communications and security governance.
We have also to separate observation from monitoring. The observers actually record what they have seen and then send you report and recommendation to the organization that has sent them for improvement in future. But monitors can actually intervene. The practice does not allow the observers to intervene, but monitors can do that.
Across West Africa, election observation is a massive operation, from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, to the African Union. Missions are deployed across elections. This was the case in the latest presidential polls in the sub-region, in countries including Benin, Guinea-Bissau, and Côte d'Ivoire. In Benin's 2026 presidential election alone, over 1,500 observers were deployed, but numbers alone don't tell the full story. Because beyond international missions, regional civil society also plays a role. The West African Network for Peace Building was among those tracking the process on the ground.
In the case of the April 12, 2026 presidential election, the Civil Society Electoral Platform in Benin, coordinated by ONEP Benin, deployed a total of 1,571 electoral observers, including 1,200 static observers and 511 mobile observers across surrounding areas. This deployment covered 1,200 polling stations.
But not all observers operate the same way. Some are present long before election day, tracking campaigns, media access, inclusivity, and political tensions. Again, Paul Ejime explains.
There are mainly two types of observers. You have the ones that you may call long-term. Those are the ones that come to the country of observation before the election. They stay during and then after the election to follow the results release and what can happen. Because at times, issues can crop up, conflicts. Elections have become drivers and facilitators of conflicts in Africa in particular. So observing them, I will come to what you call the benefits. But aside from these long-term observers, you also have short-term observers, those who come maybe just a day or two or a few days before the election, observe the election day, and then they leave. So, but the key ones, the ones that are long-term.
Election observation may suggest stability, but reality can shift very quickly. Following the presidential election in Guinea-Bissau in 2025, the head of the ECOWAS Observer Mission, the Ghanaian diplomat and statesman Baba Kamara, praised the process.
So far, the elections have gone very, very well. I was saying that Guinea-Bissau has made we, the West Africans, proud. Everybody thought it was going to be the firing here, fighting left, right, center. But how it went very smoothly. The Martin Indians in the same boat, and comparing notes. And when there's a problem about a particular ballot paper, the two of them will look at it and say, oh, it's okay. So it is very, very unique. And I wish other African countries will learn from this. The democracy is not about fight. It's about ideas, politics of ideas. Went very well. I'm very glad, and I wish all the people of Guinea-Bissau well.
But less than 24 hours later, that same political environment descended into crisis, ending in a military coup d'etat. So what does that tell us? That election observation captures a moment, but not always the full trajectory. And yet, observation can still play a preventive role, according to global affairs analyst Paul Ejime.
I can tell you that ECOWAS observers, because they do what you call conflict prevention or preventive diplomacy. You can't just do the standard observation and go, knowing that if anything goes wrong in that country, can have effect. So heads of observation missions, I have seen them engage the stakeholders, government, authorities, and everybody, even getting political party officials together to lower the tension. And they can engage them in dialogue and then meetings, consultations to just make sure that the temperature is down. And I give you one example. In 2016 in Benin Republic, they had an issue because the electoral umpire had insisted that to vote, you must have a voter's card. But unfortunately, they were not able to give these cards to all the eligible voters. By the way, in Benin, unlike in other places, once you are 18 and above, you are automatically included in the the registration roll. Other countries, you have to go and register to vote. But in Benin, once you are 18, the above, it just puts you in there. So it happened that not everybody was able to get all those qualified were able to get the cards. So ECOWAS travelers were on ground. They quickly met the government authorities and with the Electoral Commission to say, no, if you allow this to happen, it will create crisis, trouble, conflict. So please allow everybody who has a verifiable identity card to vote. So everybody was allowed. If you were 18, you can be verified that you're a student or you are a worker or something. So that lowered the temperature and saved what could have become a potential dangerous situation.
But even with heavy observer presence, problems still occur. Reports from Benin's 2026 presidential election highlighted attempts at voter intimidation, multiple voting incidents, irregularities in some polling stations. So again, the question remains, how much can observers really change? Election observation is expensive. From logistics to personnel, transport, and reporting, millions are spent by ECOWAS, the African Union, and international partners. But as Paul Ejime explains, the real limitation lies in implementation.
I gave you one example of how observers intervened and saved the situation. It is a case of are these recommendations implemented? You know, it's not the job of the observers to implement their own recommendations. They recommend even to ECOWAS or AU or whoever sends them. It is the duty of those authorities to follow up, and the government of the country and all the agencies. So one is making sure that these recommendations get to the right people, to those intended. And then the next step will be, have they really taken it up? Have they implemented it? So the implementation is not that of the observers. It is to whom those recommendations are made. The point is that, and from experience, I will tell you that we still have a long way to go between those recommendations and then their implementation.
So, are election observers effective? Yes, but within limits. They increase transparency, help prevent conflict, document what happens, but they cannot enforce change. And sometimes, as seen in Guinea-Bissau, events move faster than observation can capture. In the end, election observers are not referees, they are witnesses. And in West Africa's democracies, what happens after the report may matter even more than what they observe. I am Francis Boniface. This has been InfoCheck. Don't forget, stay critical.
Indeed, stay critical, and that was InfoCheck, analyzing the impact of election observers.
And thank you for joining us on Citizens Hour, supported by NET, because this is how we wrap up the conversation.
We will be back in about 2 weeks with more discussions on democracy and governance in West Africa. But don't forget that Imo Edit and Usman Umar will bring you Citizens Hour next week. So do stay tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio.
Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep the democratic conversation on. I am Veronica Njai.
And I am Atiyewe Nimbila. Thank you so much for your time and for listening. Up next is Newslink. Do enjoy the rest of our programming and have a wonderful weekend.
Citizens R is evolving as the WADR's partnership with NET continues. This April, your NET Democracy and Governance program is going to the Sahel. We will focus on Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and other West African countries, including Benin, Togo, Nigeria, and the Gambia. Bolder conversations, real voices, inclusive discussions. Let's talk